Welcome to the Bare Essentials Podcast, where the talk is real and hibernating on your goals is not an option.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I am your host, Charles Wallace. Today's guest's journey to becoming a healing professional began prior to him entering nurse practitioner school. He didn't realize it at the time, but his undergraduate education would set him on a path of service. His original aim was to obtain a degree in business. However, while in college, the school's focus on social justice and service of others pushed him in a different direction. His professors offered him a broader perspective on the world, and many volunteer opportunities helped solidify his purpose in life, to teach and help others. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce author of the book, The Mental Wellness Diet, Justin Bethoney. Hi, Justin. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, really appreciate it, Justin, and can't wait to speak to you about your book and your practice. Obviously, I probably didn't do it justice. I'm going to allow you to give you a brief introduction to the audience.
Great. Well, I thanks for going back. You probably got that off my website, the bio that I wrote about my career path. Many nurse practitioners are quote unquote career changers. So people who had success in one field or another, know nothing in medicine or science, and then decide they really want to help others, and then they're too old to become a doctor, so you go and become a nurse practitioner. So that was my path. I went to Villanova, right down the street from where you are. And the school was really focused on social justice, and there's a lot of volunteer opportunities. And, they focused on the core humanities, and it was a really well-rounded education. My degree was in business management. So my first couple jobs were cold calling, which was not the kind of job you want for somebody who has compassion or feeling or empathy. It was a tough, that was an education in and of itself. So then, if we want to go back into my story, so then I moved to California after I graduated, and couldn't really find any work, was running out of money, and then decided to just do what I've always done. And I used to teach swim lessons to kids, and coached basketball and taught and things like that. So then I worked at this facility that was for kids with special needs, emotional and behavioral difficulties. So that job, my first job out of college, earned just a little over $20,000 a year. It's pretty modest, but it was the best first job I could have gotten, because it really connected to, my unique talents and my interests, and it gave me a bit more of a purpose. And so that job led to another job in a similar kind of field, another job to finally get into nursing school. By the time I was 27, and then, when you go into nursing school, you have to pick your specialty. And so my specialty from the start was psych, mental health. So then I graduated, and, I was in school when I started learning about functional medicine. So I was learning about functional medicine, and at the same time being taught all the conventional medicine principles. And so that was, kind of a challenge to stitch it all together, but eventually did. And then, as soon as I started practicing, from the beginning, I was thinking about incorporating sleep, diet, exercise, supplements here and there. And, just kind of taking a different look at the patient, looking at them as a whole person. So I've been practicing about 10 years. And then it was about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I got the idea to write the book.
That's great stuff. And Justin, honestly, when I was, what intrigued me about and made me really want to talk to you, besides the book, was the whole functional medicine. And I think functional medicine as a term, we're starting to hear more about that. We're hearing about it more often. Could you maybe talk a little bit how that compares to what I'll call the traditional or conventional care model for patients?
Yeah, one great way to break it down is the difference between acute care and chronic care, or acute issues and chronic conditions. So things like diabetes or heart disease, being overweight, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, these are all chronic conditions. No one day is worse than the other. Typically, it's just chronically getting worse and worse over time. but you're not going to die from it typically on any given day. Then there's acute illness, and for acute illness, conventional medicine, which would be the kind of medical approach you would see in an emergency room or urgent care, or even in, I guess, your primary care's office, is amazing. You know, if you have you cut off your finger or break your arm, or if you're having a heart attack, or some sort of medical crisis, you're having an acute illness, and so the medical model, the conventional medical model, is designed around very effectively and swiftly identifying and addressing and fixing acute illness. The conventional medicine isn't so terrible at chronic illness, but if you cut your arm off with a chainsaw, there was one factor that caused that disease. If you have diabetes, there's probably 5 or 6 factors that cause that disease. And so functional medicine takes a broader perspective on chronic care, and it looks at what can we do to prevent and what can we do to reverse. And it's typically not just one thing. It's typically not just a pill here or a surgery here. It's diet, sleep, exercise, stress management, maybe even some forms of spirituality, looking at the whole person.
Yeah. And Justin, the reason why it really interested me was 3 years ago now, I was very overweight. I was at like 267 pounds, 200. I was way out there. And I was on medications, for my heart. I was having these weird weird things were going on. I finally somebody recommended me to see a cardiologist, and he had more of a functional kind of medicine approach. And I love the way he spoke to me. The office visit took about 45 minutes, the way he spoke to me, and literally just set me straight with, listen, like, I could keep you on medication for as long as your body's going to hold out, or we can talk about the changes you need to make in order to get off this medicine. And it was from that point that I was, I'm happy to say now I'm definitely probably in the best shape I've been in probably since my 20s. And I haven't been on medication for 2.5 years. So that's why I like what you said. I think we need more of that. And I really appreciate people like you who are taking that approach. So that being said, because I don't think this is easy in any way, what made you decide to write the mental wellness diet?
Well, that moment you just described. I've practicing 10 years, probably worked in maybe 4 or 5 different clinics, maybe probably seen a couple thousand different patients. Across those couple thousand different patients, I've met everybody along all the different stages of readiness to change. When you met with that cardiologist, he probably caught you at a good moment, and he was also a great doctor, and he was going to stick it to you. You got choice A or choice B. What do you want to do? And so life changing, obviously. Not everybody is ready. So when I meet them in the office, I can only hold so many patients, and when I meet them, maybe they're not ready for. I always rank changing somebody's diet right underneath changing their politics or their religion. The way we eat is really so personal, and actually. So my book doesn't actually come up when I treat patients that much until they ask me, or they're ready for it, or they ask about diet specifically. They don't give it to them. But so I wrote this book to try to meet people in that same moment you were in when you met with that cardiologist. When people are ready, I want them to have the information that's going to, give them the best chance at making the change when they're ready to make the change. And change is.
Yeah, it's funny too. You described it as meeting me at the best moment or the right moment. And I say to people all the time, it really takes you being at your absolute worst moment sometimes for it to be your best moment. And I'm just grateful to that doctor and people like him and like you. So interesting. This is something I've been doing more research myself about. And I think in general, we think a lot about, when we think of food, we think about how it impacts us physically, right? Our weight, the way we look, that kind of thing. I don't think people really consider, I know I wasn't, right? I don't think people really consider how food impacts our brains from just a nutrition perspective. So in your research, writing the book, what, and it might sound basic, right? But what do our brains need to ensure that they are performing optimally as far as food?
Great question. And, that's a great setup for the question too, because, even psychiatry had been dealing with this forever, for centuries, the separation between the mind and the body. If you don't eat well, you're not going to perform well in running the marathon. That's very commonsensical. Mm. But, I can't even count how many adolescent patients I have that don't eat breakfast and don't eat lunch and, push it really hard in school. And then, are seeking some sort of assistance or some sort of edge. How about breakfast? It just doesn't always compute for us naturally. So what the brain needs, well, our mind is maybe separate from the body, but our brain is not. Our brain is within the body. It's part of the body. It gets fed nutrients from the body. So whatever we eat, which goes into our digestive system and we absorb, the bloodstream will bring those nutrients to the body. So what do we need? We need vitamins. It's pretty commonsensical. Minerals are actually really important. Amino acids, which comes from proteins. So proteins can be into smaller parts called peptides. And then those peptides, the smallest unit of a protein is an amino acid. And those unique amino acids are actually the building blocks for neurotransmitters. The communication molecules that help us feel and think and remember and perceive. So experiencing life depends on those amino acids and those proteins. And then healthy fats are really important. The brain is a large percentage fat, much more than any other organ. So you need that fat to create that structure. You need the structure to be there in place to have the brain function optimally. If you didn't build your house appropriately, it would fall apart. It wouldn't function. So the same is true of the brain. I think I'll end with this question with what these nutrients do is many of the vitamins and minerals anyways, is they accelerate natural metabolic processes. So the accelerator in a body typically is an enzyme. An enzyme converts one substance into a different substance that's similar, but just a different form. Then when it's in a different form, it can do a different job or it can serve a different function. And those vitamins and minerals often serve as they plug into the enzyme and help the enzyme speed up the process. So if you want to feel and function at your best, obviously you want your engine running as smoothly and efficiently as fast as possible. And vitamins and minerals are the thing that turn the gears in the brain.
Thanks for that, Justin. So just a slight follow-up on that, because I think this is a question I think it's an age-old question. So when it comes to that, right, I think as a pick-me-up, you mentioned like breakfast, right? Coffee, caffeine, yay or nay?
Depends.
As far as
sure. Yeah, it could go a couple different ways with this question, but if you've been drinking coffee for a while, you're probably adapted to it. I'm 41. I wrote a book. I got 2 young kids. Coffee doesn't work for me anymore, so it doesn't really matter. Gotcha. It matters if I don't drink it, but it doesn't matter if I drink extra. I guess if you've never drinking coffee or if you haven't had it in a while, it will probably be fairly strong. The way that coffee works is there's this molecule called adenosine that builds up in the brain, and it blocks adenosine from interacting with the receptor. So it kind of tricks the brain into not feeling that sleep pressure. It can be overused. It's like the number one drug, the number one most consumed substance, drug in the world. It when you need it, it can turn things on. It can turn on your alertness. It can kind of promote norepinephrine and dopamine release. But would you drive your car pedal to the metal all throughout town all the time and then slam on the brakes and never get an oil change? No, you wouldn't do that to your car. So should you be drinking, a pot of coffee all day, every day? Probably not.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I think as human beings, right? I think I can talk about all the right things that we should do. I do feel like though, people, it's unfortunate, but I feel like they respond better to the negative aspect to make a positive of it. So in your opinion, how can not eating the right foods negatively impact mental wellness? And can diet actually contribute to issues like anxiety and depression?
Okay, so scare tactics,
Mm-hmm.
straightforward.
Yeah.
Well, there's some toxins out there. Sugar or excess simple carbohydrates, too much sugar, that's one of them. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people, some of the grains can be problematic. So wheat is probably the biggest one. For some people, we can all have various food sensitivities to. I mean, I took a test once and it was like cantaloupe, which I never eat, and salmon, which I always ate, and then wheat. So it really is unique to the person. Some food toxins, but sugar is pretty much terrible. Too much carbohydrates kind of terrible. Trans fats are terrible, and then the absence of fruits, vegetables, in my opinion, in the book, in the mental wellness diet, meat products for the protein and the fat soluble vitamins and the other minerals. So what happens when you eat like garbage is kind of the question.
Yes.
Well, the basic answer is you don't feel as well. You feel kind of like garbage. There's I always bring this phrase up to people, and not everybody has always heard of it, but the phrase robbing Peter to pay Paul. You've heard of that. Okay, great. That. Yeah. So if your body doesn't have what it needs, there's usually various forms of robbing Peter to pay Paul. For example, if you eat sugar, or just maybe if you don't eat breakfast, or maybe you just had like a Pop-Tart for breakfast, that sugar will get absorbed and you'll have fuel for 20 minutes to an hour. And then typically you'll have some sort of an insulin response. We'll grab that sugar out of the blood and stuff it into a fat cell or muscle cell, or we'll just take it out because that's what insulin is trained to do. And so when that happens, you can have an experience where you start off, you eat the Pop-Tart, your blood sugar goes up, and then sooner or later your blood sugar kind of plummets, partly because it burns up quick and partly because the insulin grabs it real quick and stuffs it away. That condition is sometimes termed as reactive hypoglycemia. So you're reacting to the food and the insulin response, and then hypo means low, glycemia is blood sugar. What happens when your blood sugar goes too low? Well, if you don't eat, your body really wants to bring your blood sugar back up. And if eating is the first way to do it, but if you don't eat, or if you refuse to eat, or if you're distracted and you don't sense those hunger signals, well, your body will go to the liver and the muscles and release stored up blood sugar in the form of glycogen, which is the storage form of blood sugar. But what the key is that unlocks all that blood sugar is often the stress hormones. So there's a hormone called glucagon that can do it, but there's also adrenaline and cortisol. So if you've ever had the experience where you didn't eat breakfast and you're cruising through your day and you're humming along until maybe you crash at 2, or maybe you make it the whole day and you feel like Superman. Well, you're not Superman. You're just running on fumes. You're just running on your stress hormones. And so an excessive release of stress hormones triggered by this poor eating habit can be destructive to the body. Cortisol will release that energy and it will make you kind of focus, but cortisol kind of promotes stress and anxiety. And the other thing that cortisol does is it turns off your immune system, so then you're really kind of tearing down the body and not creating an environment where your body can recover and heal. Do that day in and day out, and you're inviting disease.
Yeah, so you touched on a lot there. So it makes sense. It's that physical, you described the whole physical reaction to it, but I can see really quickly when you mention about the stressors and the cortisol, how that can start to, work on your mind as far as anxiety goes. And do you find though, in your practice, your mental health practice, and I feel like this is pretty common, unfortunately. Do you find patients are more willing and they come to you? It's more they'd rather just get a pill, and as opposed to trying to work with you on lifestyle and diet changes. I know you mentioned earlier about how hard that is, but do you experience that a lot as people rather just take the quick fix, the pill?
Yeah, I would say yes, but not in a critical way. I
Mm.
mean, if you've ever broken a bone, or if you've ever been in a lot of pain, and then you had to sit in the waiting room, it's mentally it's really difficult. When you're experiencing mental and emotional difficulties, depression, panic attacks, anxiety, PTSD, trauma, you're obviously, you don't have all your capacities. You're not able to hear, you're not able to listen, you're not able to think your best, you're not able to kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, how am I going to really fix this problem? I don't think many people exactly want a pill. They just want an answer. And I always understand and have a lot of compassion for that urgency. So it's a slow warm up to a lot of the principles in my book. I think that speaks a lot to the human nature. I think I'd add to that answer. I think there's a backside to this where stress for us, the chronic stress of our modern day lives, builds up and builds up and builds up. And similar to how we can't notice that we're hungry because we're just running on the stress hormones all day, and we don't really connect the dots that there's a problem there. Our minds are really amazingly powerful in their ability to repress and push down and block and distract ourselves from physical and as well, and also mental and emotional pain. And so again, you have, like, if you're just running on the cortisol all day, eventually the disease will build up. If you're just repressing all day and not really paying attention and not, downshifting and trying to address your stress or address your problems or solve your problems and just repressing, all that stress and trauma will build up, and then a mental illness will emerge.
So Justin, if if I come to you or a new patient comes to you, how, and you start to have these deeper conversations, just to give the audience a little bit of an idea, like how some minor things, right? Some things that they could start to do as far as changing lifestyle and some dietary choices to help them with any type of, mental illness issue, as far as anxiety, depression, things like that. Are there some things right off the bat that you kind of would start with, maybe start slow with, to start walking them through it?
Sure. Well, back to that repression thing, it's universal. We all repress. I do it too. I mean, that's how I wrote a book. So I had to kind of push down the burning the candles at both ends, stress and the exhaustion and the fear and the self-consciousness and all of that, and just kind of push on through while still, maintaining my other responsibilities. I think, the number one functional medicine intervention for my patients is therapy. So when people come to see me, and instead of 15 minutes, it's typically sometimes a half an hour, but usually I spend the hour with patients. So it's, 10 to 15 minutes talking about medication or strategizing there. But the rest is, what's going on. It's that creating that space for people to kind of come and dump or get it out or admit and acknowledge. And so, that relationship and that rapport and that space has to kind of be created first. Like you said, with the cardiologist, he didn't convince you in 50 minutes. It took him 45.
Yeah, it really did. And I notice what you just described, though, and I haven't been to primary care recently. I think it's probably been about 2 years maybe. But the last time I was at primary care, everything seemed like it was so on that 15-minute increment, right? Doctor had you scheduled for 15, hope to get you out within 10. So you had 5 minutes before the next patient. And, it seemed like it was more about getting through it, getting the quickest solution for you so that they could move on. But there definitely isn't, I don't think, in the primary care model at this point in time, there's definitely not that willingness, or not, I won't even say willingness. Some doctors may want to do it. I think those also, you mentioned about burning the candles at both ends. I think sometimes our health system, they're so overworked to a point, and their job is to almost see as many patients as possible. So again, I can really appreciate your approach. And I think people should maybe consider seeking out that approach. I think it would be beneficial. Um, so Justin, in your book, I saw in your book, you mentioned a bit about, I believe it was your grandmother. I
Mm-hmm.
think you mentioned she lived into her 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you said in your book was she was standing upright, cooking well into her 90s,
Mm-hmm.
which bravo to her. Um, just, are there any, I'll call it not, are there any foods you would say, hey, probably most people don't eat this or that, but it's very beneficial to your mental health? Is there any one or two types of foods that you would say, yeah, start trying this?
Yeah, it's a philosophy, which is pretty common in functional medicine, called nutrient density. So nutrient density is for every bite of food you take, how many vitamins, minerals, amino acids, essential fats, and other important nutrients are jam-packed in that one bite of food. So, and then you can compare it to a Pop-Tart. Yeah, my grandma didn't eat Pop-Tarts. She made soups and stews, and organ meats is, most of us find pretty gross. But the fact is they are, on the top of the list of nutrient density. So if you manage your diet through the principle of nutrient density, you'll be eating a lot of organ meats, or there's plenty of like really great supplement companies out there that put it in capsule forms. It's desiccated, which is dried and chopped up. Put it in, you get your little 6 little capsules. You gag for a couple minutes and then it's over. And then next on the list would be muscle meat of animal. We're more conditioned to eat those. Fish and shellfish are also up there, especially for the minerals that the brains need. Shellfish are amazing. And then connective tissues, again, they provide glycine. Glycine is a really important amino acid, one of the smallest amino acids. It's healthy for the skin and blood pressure, but glycine has been even studied in OCD and schizophrenia and other mental health disorders. And usually people are taking a massive dose in those studies, but it proves to be helpful. And, the reason probably is that the glycine can stimulate inhibitory receptors. What does that mean? That means, your brain has go signals and it has stop signals. And, just like we need traffic lights and traffic cops, and in your car, you need a gas pedal and you need a brake pedal to be able to steer in the direction you want. You really need the gas pedal. You can't just whip around the turns going 40 miles per hour. So you need the brake, and glycine kind of supports that braking system in the brain. And so typically it's pretty good for anxiety and other conditions. Organ meats is at the top. Muscle meats is there too. Connective tissue, fish, shellfish, vegetables, fruits. That's pretty common sense. They're not as nutrient dense, but they are healthy. And then, herbs and spices actually is up there too. One more food category is some of those, the fruits, the vegetables, sometimes fermented foods, and the herbs and spices. They all have substances called flavonoids. Curcumin and turmeric, ECCG and green tea, resveratrol and green grapes. These are all flavonoids that actually are active in the brain and can help, and actually have been studied for various mental health conditions.
And I'm at the point now where with your book, there's definitely some things in that list that you just said that I don't eat currently that I am going to try to embark on adding some of it. Definitely liver stands out.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can remember having liver when I was young.
Yeah.
I don't probably think my parents called it something else to trick me into eating it, but maybe I'll have to find out what they called it, so it'll help me get back to doing it. So, well, definitely thanks for that. I like to ask this of people, especially in your space in your practice. What's been one of the most profound experience you may have had with mental illness and how has it made its way into your patient care model?
So you're asking about for me personally?
Yes.
Yeah. My son is going to turn 5, and so much came together for me. Everybody's healthy and everybody's happy, and we're doing okay. But this was due to modern life. And I was in California, and we had kids, and our grandparents. Our parents weren't there, so no grandparents. The rent's really high. Work is really hard. And it's this that hard thing about needing to be in 2 places at one time. And so, both of my kids were colicky, which if you haven't experienced it, it's kind of nightmarish. And I remember thinking to myself, like, when my both of my babies were colicky, and for probably the first 6 months, and I remember thinking to myself, like, this is the first problem I didn't know how to solve. When you're a kid, you just go to school, you do your best, you get decent grades, you go to college, you have fun, you get your grades, you graduate, you move on, you do your first job, they tell you what to do. It's not really hard. None of that was ever really, no failure there. But a little baby screaming in your ear, it kind of changes you. And especially if you can't do anything about it. So, yeah, I think that was maybe the most familiar I've gotten with failure.
Yeah, and I think you would agree with this. Failure is probably our best teacher, especially when we're able to come out the other side of it. So that's good. Last thing I want to ask you is what's the toughest message you may have ever had to give one of your patients to try to, get them to almost last resort? Have you ever gotten to that point where you really had to deliver a tough message and you were at your wit's end and this was it?
No, I really like what you said about the failure piece. And, I wrote in my book, I was just having this conversation with a patient yesterday. I wrote in my book, I took a stab at a 4-step process to find your meaning and purpose. And step 1 is find something in the world that bothers you, like starving children or, sick animals or whatever. And then number 2 is kind of find something you can do to do something about it. Find some dedication, and you can kind of find your purpose in doing something. And then, number 3 is make sure it's impossible to conquer, something like golf or skateboarding. Whatever you do in life, make sure you can't win. You can never master it. It's never going to be possible. And then number 4 is make sure it's something that goes against the grain, that bothers people, that other people would never want to do. It goes against what is natural for other people, but it connects with something inside of you. And that way it's all yours. There will be no competition for whatever it is, that purpose that you have or that meaning. And so it's such a privilege to sit with people with their struggles. People tend to be of 2 minds. There's the pain, and then there's the wish for things to change. But then people always have this other part of them that maybe has an appreciation or a comfort or a familiarity or some sort of just, I don't know what the right word is but a sort of resilience. These are their problems, and they own it. And there's a kind of sometimes an odd sense of comfort with it.
Thank you for that. I will say that was poignant, and a lot of things you said resonate with me. I say something similar, a little bit different. I say it on the show a lot, but I like to tell people that the best version of ourselves should always be the next version of ourselves, and it should always be changing, because we should always be evolving to be that best person. And Justin, this has been great. I really appreciate it, especially for a guy like me. I like to say I'm reasonably intelligent, but like having people like you, experts in your field, it makes me more educated. And what I'm trying to do with this podcast is motivate people, hopefully inspire people, but also I want to educate people about things that they may not pay attention to. And I'm not an expert in those fields. So having people like you willing to be generous with their time, come on here and speak to people about these types of things is very, very good. And I can't thank you enough. That being said, I'd like to just give you an opportunity here. How can people, plug your book, website, anything like that?
Yeah, great. Well, there's my website. My website is the best place to go. And then it has links to my blog, Instagram, and it also has a free 20-page PDF ebook, which is kind of like a preview of the book. It's got 5 recipes in it, and it will give you a flavor of what you would get if you bought the book. And then pretty soon there's going to be a link for an audiobook. So it's in paperback now, and then probably by next week, the audiobook will be available for download. That's thementalwellnessdiet.com. So www.thementalwellnessdiet.com. And so that's where you find me. That's where you get more information about my bio. Some of the blogs, there's a really popular blog about glycine on there that people seem to enjoy. There's a blog about blood sugar. There's a link for the book. And then there's that free download. And that's pretty much the best way to find me.
Great, Justin. And for the people listening and watching, obviously we only have about 30 minutes here. We can't obviously get into everything, give you all the answers, but my hope is that take what you hear from Justin, from these podcasts, and start to do some more research, look into the guests, and check out what they're doing, because it's really, really good stuff. I actually purchased the book, The Mental Wellness Diet, so I'll give it a plug there. And I'm enjoying it, and I'm definitely going to implement some of the things in there. Well, that being said, Justin, I can't thank you enough. So it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I'm looking forward to the audio book. I like to usually get the hard copy and the audio, and I like to read while I listen. Seems like I absorb it better for my brain. So thanks again. And for everyone listening, please check out Justin and his book, The Mental Wellness Diet. Thank you all for listening as always, and take care. Bye.
This has been the Bare Essentials. Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.